only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 74 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. This week I want to finish my deep dive into psychedelics and the taking of DMT, ayahuasca, LSD, these types of drugs that say, its proponents, that they allow you to enter different realms, maybe psychic realms, maybe realms where people who have passed on exist, maybe where different entities exist, maybe the great possibility that you could be transporting your mind as you do with astral projection or in your dream state to other realities, not just other dimensions, but to perhaps other planets or other star systems. Is this a short cut, a way to take a pill and enable you to suddenly become super psychic and to be able to telepathically communicate, to be able to travel limitless distances, to go within all the different dimensions that exist and see different realities? Is this really what's happening when you're taking a hallucinogenic drug, or is it just your mind making up the experience, just like perhaps it makes up some of the imaginative things that happen in dreams? Or is it a combination of the two? In this episode, I'm going to finish my investigation into psychedelics and give you some of the things that I've discovered. And most of all, when you hear what I have to say, I please don't want to be judgmental to those people who've taken hallucinogenics or are taking them. I don't mean to be that way. I just want to give an honest assessment from a spiritual point of view. Of great interest is what the famous science fiction writer Philip K. Dick said when he was asked about using LSD. He was asked that were LSD drugs a major influence on his writing? And he answered, no, absolutely not. There's nothing good about drugs. Drugs kill you and they break down your head. They eat your head. In White Rabbit, Grace Slick says, feed your head. But I say, what are you really feeding it? You're feeding it itself. Drugs cause the mind to feed on itself. To be honest with you, there was a time in my life when I thought drugs could be useful, that maybe if you took enough psychedelics, you could see beyond the illusion of the world to the nature of ultimate reality. Now I think all you see are the patterns on the rug turning into hideous things. A friend of mine had a shower curtain with tigers on it. You know, one of those prints. During an LSD trip once, the tigers started moving and tried to eat him. He ran outside, right into the backyard, and he burned the shower curtain. That epitomizes drugs to me. Some guy in his backyard burning his shower curtain. I used to think that drugs put you in touch with something. Now I know that the only thing they put you in touch with is the rubber room of a psychiatric hospital. My drug experiences have not manifested themselves in my work. Many critics have said that The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, 1965, was the first LSD novel. I wrote that after reading a magazine article on hallucinogens by Aldous Huxley. Drugs have taken the lives of some very, very dear friends of mine. Joe Rogan has become one of the leading spokespeople for DMT in the mainstream media. He's operating, as you probably know from me, one of the most popular podcasts in the world with millions of weekly listeners. He's very, very keen to talk about DMT with people who seem to know what they're talking about. But equally, he has said something slightly troubling, that he believes that you can only talk about DMT if you've actually used it. I find that troubling because I think anybody who says that you have to actually experience something to be able to talk about it is being a little stupid. It's a bit like saying you have to shoot yourself in order to be able to know what it's like to be shot. Or you have to be able to kill someone so that you can talk about murder. Yes, that might be slightly extreme, but not that extreme. Joe Rogan is one of the most popular media podcasters in the world. And as listeners to the show know, I really enjoy his show, and I think he invites some very interesting people. He's also a leading spokesperson for DMT in the mainstream media. He's taken it himself a few times and has had quite a few discussions with eminent writers, philosophers, and scientists. He was asked whether he thought that the DMT beings that you see when you're in a DMT trip are real. And he said, I don't know if real is the right word. The question is, we look at consciousness and we look at an intelligent entity as being in a physical carbon-based form that's in front of you, that you can shake hands with or give a hug to. When you experience what happens when you take dimethyltryptamine, you throw all of that out the window because the environment itself it's not defined. It's fluid, meaning that it's changing constantly. But yet there seems to be far more vivid and far more real than this life right now. And there are these things that are there and they communicate with you. And they seem to be really communicating with you. And they seem to also know you, know all of your bullshit, and be able to see right through you. But they don't seem to be you. They seem to be something else. That's all we know. That's what I think is all we know. Like you could say that's a well of souls. That's what happens when you die, or that's the afterlife. That's a parallel dimension. These are aliens, and that's how they communicate with us. Or they're non-physical life forms that exist in these realms of light. We don't know. You're just guessing. What exactly is DMT? Well, DMT is derived from tryptophan. It's an amino acid, and it's in all living organisms. It's called an indole alkaloid, or a potent serotonergic psychedelic, and it acts on the serotonin 5-HT2A receptor in the brain and is virtually ubiquitous throughout nature. In fact, DMT is so commonly encountered in the natural world that the chemist Alexander Shulgin wrote, DMT is in this flower here, in that tree over there, and in yonder animal. It is, most simply, almost everywhere you choose to look. The famous DMT researcher Dennis McKenna said that nature is drenched in DMT. Trace amounts of DMT can even be found in every glass of orange juice. Amazonian people have been using plant-based DMT as the central component of their ayahuasca brews and snuff since prehistory. DMT was first synthesized in a laboratory in 1931 by a Canadian chemist called Richard Helmuth. But the psychedelic effects of the pure substance were only discovered many years later, in fact, in Soviet Russia in 1956. DMT that's taken with that drink is quickly broken down and metabolized by the human digestive system unless they add something else to it. And the Amazonian shamans figured a way of boiling together the DMT-containing plants and plants containing a naturally occurring inhibitor that prevents the brain from absorbing it and then wasting it away. This made the process of taking ayahuasca something that would lasted much longer than would happen if you took a direct hit of, say, a synthesized version of DMT, which can last only minutes. Now, you can circumvent all sorts of issues of taking it as a drink by smoking it. You can also put it into a vape. You can inject it into your body. But as I said, it gets quickly metabolized by the body, and apparently the experiences vary according to the mode of taking it. What it will do to you as soon as you take it is send you off into an extremely powerful and vivid environment that some people believe is transporting you to an enchanted realm beyond all belief. Now, this realm has now been called hyperspace by DMT voyagers, and it's a kind of reality, a physical reality when you're there that's like a lucid dream, and it's apparently formed of crazy shapes and geometric shapes, and there are loads of different entities there, such as elves and sentient alien biomachines. Interestingly enough, the entities that people report seeing them, as discussed in one of the books that I'll put in the bottom there for you to have a look at yourself, cover the whole gamut of every type of entity that probably humans have seen since the dawn of time. I'll just give you an example. People claim to see archangels, dark entities, jesters, light beings, machine elves, goddesses, fairies. They see theatre troupes, straw men. They see aliens, elementals, wizards, gods, goddesses, angels, obviously, ghosts, spirits, horror type of things like you'd expect to see in a horror film. They see the bride of the devil, mythological creatures, talking heads, soul surgeons, world eaters. It goes on. The list goes on. The liquid that is made from the very sacred vines that are found in the Amazonian rainforest, that are mixed together with other plants and create this brew called ayahuasca, is obviously the thing that has made all this extremely famous, and the various television programs and retreats and other things that you can do if you're interested in it or you want to participate in it, although it is incredibly illegal in this country, in Germany, and I think in most of the Western world. You want to ask yourself the question, why is it so illegal? Well, I actually did do some research on that. And I think the problem is that back in the 60s, when people were experimenting with LSD and other hallucinogenics, they really just didn't want to have the possibility that people were going to be wandering around the neighborhoods, jumping off buildings or saying they could fly. And I think it was a considerable worry to the government and to probably the older generation, who could see their children potentially getting into all sorts of trouble or robbing banks or whatever it might be because they were completely out of it. Now, you could say that most of the drugs kids were taking would probably take them completely out of it anyway, but LSD was most definitely singled out and made to be categorized as one of the most dangerous substances known to man, even though clearly, as Professor David Nutt has said in his book about hallucinogenics, LSD and DMT, to his knowledge, have not caused any great social problem and very, very rarely kill anyone except if they have underlying conditions. So there does seem to be a real disconnect between why it is so massively illegal, up there with heroin, and yet it is actually quite benign in terms of its effects. Again, as David Nutt made very famously known, the most dangerous drug in the world is alcohol by far, and yet that is not criminalized in the slightest. But there we are. If you wish to do this, it's extremely legal, and you have to be doing it under either special research situations, and I can only imagine that's where people like Joe Rogan and the other authors get their supply from, if they're not buying from the street. And you have to have some real a scientific reason to be able to use this substance, and it's probably not very easy to get. Again, even if you go into the street, I'm sure it's pretty easy. As I mentioned last week, you can just walk into a shop here in Germany and you can buy analogs of LSD over the counter, as long as you just say, yes, you are doing some research. That's all you need. You can't get DMT, however. That seems to be in a category above. But obviously the original ayahuasca experiences that people had for thousands of years are interesting to study, because they saw things that are very similar or identical to what people are seeing now. And they saw UFOs and flying saucers, and they're embedded in their artwork. And if you look at some of the ancient cave paintings, you can see creatures that look very fanciful, and you could say are similar to the creatures that people claim to see when they're going to these other, if they are going to these other realms when they're taking DMT. All of this has led to, in the last 50 years or so, a tremendous interest in the link between DMT, the realms that it apparently takes you to, the beings that you see, and the UFO experience. People claim that you can see the same types of aliens on these dimensions when you're taking DMT, that people who've been abducted by aliens or people who've seen aliens claim that they see, such as mantis-type aliens or grey-type aliens or lizard-type aliens, as we discussed with the Lacerta files. So rather than waiting for them to land in a spaceship in your backyard, if you take DMT, the chances are you're somehow going to be, if you believe this, going into another dimension where all these space aliens can communicate with us easily. And in a way, it's being suggested that taking DMT, or the God molecules, it's very elaborately called by some, allows you to sort of short-circuit your brain into being able to enter that level of consciousness and see everything from people who are dead, who have passed on, to those who are not living, those who don't have bodies, creatures that may live with us side by side in other dimensions, entities from other star systems, or maybe entities who we can't actually feel or see because we just don't have that ability during our normal consciousness. But when we take this drug, it expands our consciousness, and suddenly our radio receiver massively widens, and we get access to all the stuff that has been around apparently for thousands and thousands of years. Cultural expectations are very important, I think, for people taking DMT. There was a description by one of the gurus of DMT, Terence McKenna, and he described seeing self-transforming machine elves. Now, all of these things that people see, you could say, are very similar to what you find in Hindu deities or biblical figures, angels or demons, which seem to match up with people's expectations of what angels and demons may look like, maybe from ancient texts or modern-style movies. But without any doubt, there is a combination of the ability for your mind to create things like in a dream, but also for there to be some sort of collective consciousness there that we're not completely aware of yet. It's as if there is this, as Carl Jung apparently said in his notion of archetypes, a collective unconscious. It's some sort of mental space that all humans share, and they can have some very common features in dreams and myths all the way around the world. But there may be a possibility that we could explain that in neuroscience, because obviously our brains are all the same, and traditional medicines are designed on that basis, that they will have similar effects with us. So if you're taking psilocybin or DMT, it's probably not unsurprising, since it's binding with the serotonin TA receptors. It disrupts the default networks, and it increases communication between other brain networks that don't normally communicate directly. And this produces an effect that is probably going to be similar or even identical with most people who take the drugs. So that might explain why so many people, or psychonauts as they're called, who go into the DMT realms, describe the same things. It doesn't in itself mean that they are going to a land where the same things are actually existing. Lucid dreaming is very interesting because it sort of connects to the way that people describe the experiences they're having when they're taking DMT. Lucid dreaming is where you go into a dream and you're aware that you're dreaming, and then you can go with the flow and almost make your dream work around you, and you can explore the dream world while being asleep, but in a way certain consciousness is still there. Now, if you're on DMT and you're having this type of reality, it would seem that you're having the same experiences as a lot of lucid dreamers. Quite often it feels as if apparently you're a puppet, or you might even have a complex personality. Or you may seem that you can actually have conversations with wise and magical beings, or you may actually be dreaming in a way and seeing things that you've had in your dreams before. Or you might be having fantasies of things that have happened to you in your life that you're completely aware of or had forgotten. So I suggest maybe, could it be that DMT is actually putting you into your dream state? A dream state that all of us have every night, although not every one of us can remember what these dreams are. DMT may be that key that's opening up your consciousness while you're awake and allowing you to enter your dream state, where you have this incredible fertile imagination. It could be that. Or maybe it could be that in your dream state, as I actually believe, you are to a certain extent having access to non-physical realities, and it is potentially a portal to allow you to have some access to some of the very lower realms above us, the slightly nearer realms that I've discussed in previous episodes to our own consciousness. So, of course, this leads to the big question, do these entities really exist? Are they independent? And, of course, it's the biggest mystery facing scientists and people who take DMT or any hallucinogen. And it's, of course, why I'm really interested in it myself. So, as you can probably tell, I certainly do believe that there is a certain amount of independent existence that you're having an experience of, and you are somehow leaving your normal mind. Now, this DMT phenomenon obviously makes people question the reality that they're actually living when they're awake. It's a question of what's real and not real. If what you're encountering while you're on DMT seems real, then is what we're doing right now when you're sitting there listening to this, or driving in your car, or I'm sitting here recording this, is this real? Or are we living in some form of elaborate matrix, like the movie, where we're in a type of hallucination? And what's happening when we take DMT is that we're obviously escaping that hallucination, just like in the movie when you're taking the blue pill or the red pill. And you could get access to what really is happening, and that maybe this life is this elaborate hologram. I have read descriptions where people say that they've gone to these other realms while on DMT and have actually been taken into quite deep realms where they actually see doors and they push through those doors. And once they get into these spaces, they claim to see some form of psychic surgeons who are operating on us, and they can see that, operating on our brains usually. And it's usually a benign experience. There have been a few hostile encounters, but most of the time, apparently, these people who are doing this surgery, a lot of them apparently look like these white praying mantises. They seem to be quite pleasant people. They don't seem to be nasty in any way. They're not evil, but they are usually giving us quite interesting wisdom. Some describe them as somehow being superior to us and having that sense that we have to do what we're told, and they're somehow in charge of us. And that seems to be quite prevalent in a lot of these DMT entity experiences, that we're quite low down the pecking order, and we're somehow getting access to loads of entities that are very superior to us, have far more intelligence and technical ability than us. But interestingly, when you go into these realms quite deeply, which allegedly is quite hard because usually with DMT, you're only in that sort of space for about 10 minutes until your brain metabolizes the molecule. But if you can get through the shock and the awe of seeing everything and push further, or if you're doing it an awful lot, and some people do it 60, 70 times till they get to this region, you apparently can go to areas where there are pods full of people like us, who are all either asleep or being experimented on. All this sounds incredibly like the Matrix, but you wonder, is this because too many people have seen the Matrix? Or is there really some sort of place that you are telepathically seeing that exists in another reality where we lie and our real selves are experiencing nothing but sleep? And what we're experiencing here in our reality is the dream that they're having. It sounds fantastical, doesn't it? I think it's safest not to assume that when you're in a DMT or an LSD trip and you're going to these apparent alternate dimensions, that the entities you see are real. I think it's probably a little bit far-fetched to assume that they are real. However, they appear to be real to you and your consciousness. And that, of course, is important enough in most respects. I think it's a very complex question, and I'm sure loads of very eminent people are examining this and will one day come to a little bit more of a proper answer to the question. But I think a lot of the people who are interested in it are still trying to understand that does something exist in these other dimensions that we're having access to when we're taking drugs? Is it the same as when I am channeling and I'm talking to my spirit guide, Titan, or to other people? Are these entities really existing, or are they a product of my mind, just like when you're taking DMT? It's very difficult because they seem to have their own consciousness. You seem to be convinced that you're having that experience, and in that respect, it makes them real. Also reported is a tremendous similarity in the DMT experience to those who've had near-death experiences. It's been discussed that the DMT as a molecule exists in all animals. Some people allege that it's in our pineal gland, although other research shows that it's actually everywhere. It's probably majorly located within our lungs for some reason. It could be something to do with the way we breathe. And some people claim that you can get into a altered state of reality with breathing exercises. This is something that people have done, again, for thousands of years. Could it be that breathing exercises, or as it's now called, breath work, encourage your body to be producing DMT and allowing you to go through that experience without physically taking or smoking anything? It's very, very possible. Shamans and people who do yoga and people who go into deep states of relaxation, maybe this is actually allowing your body to release DMT into your system. Also, if you are in that space, it's been reported that the more you go to it, the less in a way that you are able to feel welcome. Apparently, it's been said that some of these psychonauts have been told by the guides that they interact with there that it's not you again, or it's not your time. So it would seem almost that they're getting the feeling that they're having some sort of near-death experience and it's not their time to be there. It's as if these entities in the DMT worlds are quite tolerant of you visiting. And I think they feel that they're quite happy to have you there to give you the knowledge and the experience that we're not alone and that there are other realities. They're happy to share information, but it's never world-shattering information. It seems to be information that sounds pretty amazing, as does most information probably when you're on a high. But eventually it would seem that you have enough of it and you can't really get any more out of it. Some people are even locked out of the ability to go to these other worlds after a while. Could it be that the entities or whatever is going on in your mind knows that too much of LSD or too much of DMT is dangerous, because that rewiring of your brain, which can become permanent, could end up being a serious harm to you and causing psychosis. We'll talk about that later. But there is now a lot of thought that the type of issues that you can experience if you take too much LSD or too much DMT, which could become permanent, your brain may have a natural defense mechanism that could be trying to shut you off so you don't rewire your brain too much. It's fascinating how people describe people with autism and people with ADD or with other psychological issues. And I do really hate using words like that, because they are just different from us. They don't really have issues. Let's say they have a different way of thinking. It doesn't mean that they're bad or good. I'm just saying they are categorized in our society and they're put on what's called the spectrum. But maybe all that is that their brain is already slightly differently wired from a normal, whatever that is, brain. And taking DMT or LSD can actually unstick those wires and move them into another configuration. And it could be that rewiring could cause that person who has a brain that is considered to be on the spectrum could get rewired to an extent that it's considered to be normal again. And there is an awful lot of literature out there suggesting that DMT and LSD can be of significant help after only a few experiences to people with everything from eating disorders, ADD, autism, Asperger's, and any number of what are considered to be psychological problems. But because the drug is illegal, and there are only a few research institutes that are actually examining DMT and LSD, it's really not well known yet whether the help is there and whether those people with those psychological issues are being permanently helped or just temporarily rewired somehow. But there is a lot of excitement in the scientific community that is examining this, because they believe it could be the answer to the huge volumes of antidepressants that are being taken in the population in the world. As I think I've mentioned before, I mean, I believe 60% of Americans are on some form of antidepressant, and I'm sure those figures are the same in Germany and England and around the world. And all of that medicating to deal with depression can't be the best thing for your body. So it is very tempting to say, okay, well, we can take LSD or DMT and maybe only need to do it once or twice in a controlled situation, and you'll be somehow cured. It's tempting for the people to think that, but also it is probably frightening to the drug companies who make billions and billions from selling antidepressants, because why would they want to invest in more scientific experimentation and research into hallucinogenic drugs and their efficacy and people would only take them twice if they can already peddle the antidepressants that they've got and keep the population, if you like, addicted to that. It's maybe a conspiracy theory, a bit like tobacco. So lastly, I wanted to talk about psychosis and the potential dangers of taking these drugs. Again, if you read the internet groups and you read books on the subject, you'll get a lot of conflicting information. Some people who have had problems like OCD have found that it's really helped. Others found that it's made it worse. Some people who've got schizophrenia say that it's completely changed their lives and they're healed. Other people said that it was terrible and it was a horror show and it made it so much worse and it took them years to recover after stopping. And of course, the similarity between people who have what are called mental disorders, such as schizophrenia, and the experiences that you're having when you're in a DMT state are quite similar. You're being disassociated from your consciousness, and the reality that you see is not the same. Now, I had some messages passed down, I think, last year from Titan, and he discussed the use of recreational drugs, and I think I discussed that in the last few episodes as well. There is a tremendous warning out there that you've got to be so careful with these drugs, because although they may be naturally produced in their brain, they are there for a reason, and they're perhaps responsible for dreaming. They may be there perhaps to help you overcome the fear of death, or they may be there to help you be able to deal with difficulties in your life. But studies are showing that psychiatric patients can quite often have quite high levels of DMT in their blood and in their brain. Could it be that this is directly explained as the problem of mental illness being too much DMT in your system? Drug-induced long-term psychosis is very frequent with people who've taken LSD and DMT, and it very often resembles schizophrenia. So could it be that all of these things that have been discussed by psychologists and psychiatrists for many years as being a psychiatric disorder are actually just caused by too much DMT that we're producing, an overreactive DMT production? I certainly mentioned, I think in the last episodes, my experiences with a friend of mine who went off to Holland to take ayahuasca, and I would have a feeling perhaps that she never quite recovered. Now, it's not just LSD and hallucinogenics that can cause psychosis. Of course, things like cannabis can do the same. Although, unfortunately, you get a tremendous resistance from people who take cannabis to any discussion of this, because they think what they're doing is very safe and probably safer than alcohol, and they may well be right. But it doesn't mean that it's not actually causing them harm, as alcohol causes harm. And usually the friends that I know who take cannabis deny this massively and say that, the benefits massively outweigh any negatives. They usually explain that it's the modern street versions of cannabis that are made in a Chinese laboratory that are causing the problems because of the heightened levels of the active ingredient that's put into these things. And also, quite often, you just don't know what you're buying because it's not a very highly regulated marketplace. And you could be taking cannabis with not only added chemicals, but as I said, they've been genetically modified to be particularly strong in the active ingredients. And this can be causing people tremendous psychotic problems.
So I published a study on 1,000 marijuana users, compared it to our healthy group. Every area of their brain was lower in blood flow and activity. And then there's a new study by a completely separate group than ours on 1,000 young marijuana users, and the areas of the brain involved in learning and memory were low in blood flow and activity. So it's not just me because I have a problem with marijuana. It's other scientists as well saying marijuana is not great for the brain.
Often the problem is that psychosis is so unpredictable. It can either be caused by taking a drug, or psychosis can be helped by a drug. It can be triggered by any number of things, and people could put it down to the drug when maybe it was something completely different, just life events. But with all drugs, we're human, and we don't want to admit that the substances we enjoy or the food that we have can have harmful effects. We don't want to admit that our actions can potentially cause global warming. And people who take these drugs regularly claim that it will give them some form of mental clarity that maybe I don't have. Many people feel that this does help their anxiety and their depression. But it could be that it's actually causing more harm to their brain. And as they grow older, tremendous problems will materialize. I mean, I don't know of many doctors or people who have positions that require their brains to be completely alert, such as pilots, who take huge amounts of weed or mushrooms. I may be wrong. So psychedelics may not cause it, or they may cause it a bit, but they may trigger something that you were already predisposed to have. If you or someone in your family has a history of psychosis or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, it can spiral or trigger an episode for some people. And it seems to be that slippery slope, that Russian roulette that I spoke about in the last episode. I'm certainly aware from a girlfriend that I had who did take LSD once, and she got into a very bad state. I heard she had psychosis, PTSD attacks, and she had tremendous amount of hallucinations. And eventually she began to disassociate herself from society. This was a long time ago, back in the 1980s. And I heard that it took her years of therapy and probably even hypnosis to help her get out of that. I remember her mother also had various undiagnosed mental disorders such as bipolar disorder. So maybe, yes, it was something that was in her family, and taking the drug somehow sparked it off. And of course, that's often the fear that people have about taking these drugs, that, as I said, they're playing Russian roulette and they could be the one. And quite lastly, I wanted to briefly just touch on the sense that what really is happening to people who are taking psychedelic drugs, and what aspect of their experience could you say is really psychic and is very similar to perhaps the experiences that I have when I'm channeling spirits. Now, again, as you've heard, people tend to be culturally predisposed to seeing things in a DMT realm that are very similar to what they believe. So perhaps if you're Christian, you might well see Jesus or God, or you might see the apostles. People now believe that the drugs are somehow opening up this, if you like, the third eye, it's called, and it's perhaps allowing you to enter a spiritual world. But you're doing this without preparation. You're doing it without education. You're doing it without a real knowledge of what you could get yourself into. And that often probably can cause people to have a psychological breakdown. As you know, I'm extremely careful when I ever do anything that involves psychic work. I always do a preparation for it, and I always make sure I know what I'm doing, and I deliberately don't do certain things. And afterwards, I always close, if you like, the door that I've opened, and I thank people for coming through. I think if you're taking these types of drugs, you may be very confused as to what you're seeing. Given the fact that non-conscious entities, as I've discussed before, don't necessarily present themselves to you in their true form. And there are nasty things out there, just as there are nasty people out there. That nasty people who have nasty intentions can equally become, spirits who have nasty intentions. They can't physically hurt you, but they can psychologically damage you. And of course, perhaps in the history of the Bible and witchcraft, all of this stuff is somehow connected. It's not surprising that most religious groups that claim to have some contact with another realm tend to go into a form of altered state, either through music or repetitive drumming, or through drugs, or through smoking, or through singing, or through dancing. This has been brought into the modern world religions. Even Christianity has the singing, has the dancing, has the chanting. And all of this is enabling people somehow to enter a state of consciousness that allows them to be receptive to the higher realms. If you are in a higher realm because you're taking a hallucinogenic drug, you have to be extremely careful that you don't allow the entity that you're seeing to affect your psychology. That's what's come clear through to me over the last few years. The discussion that when you leave your physical consciousness because you're taking a drug, that it leaves a vacuum in your mind for other entities to come in, is very, very profound, and it's stuck with me, and I do believe that. I do believe you've got to be incredibly careful that you don't open a door, allow perhaps malignant entities who don't particularly wish you any great good, may not wish you harm, but don't wish you good, can enter, and they can somehow take you over. I discussed this once before about my uncle who believed that when he was having some form of hallucination, that something or some entity walked into him. And his wife always said until he died that he was a completely different man from the day that this entity entered him. And he went from being actually a really rather unpleasant alcoholic to being quite a nice chap. And he became very successful, and he was he managed to hold down a proper job, and I understand it had a very good effect on him. But equally, it was as if somebody had possessed him and taken over his body. Now that's very extreme. But people who are recreationally sitting around on their sofa or going off to retreats and taking hallucinogenic drugs, even with the best will in the world, they don't know quite what they're doing and what's going into their brain and maybe not leaving. And could these influences somehow appear later on in their lives or exacerbate already present problems? Of course, I hope not. And I know friends who've been to these retreats and taken things like that. And of course, I wish them well, and I hope that nothing bad happens. But I would only just end by saying, is it really worth taking the risk? Isn't it better that you go to the certain amount of hard work of going through things naturally? What I mean by that is that, I feel that if you are a religious person, then use your religion to get to an ecstatic point. Use breathing. It might well be that we are producing DMT, and maybe if you can find a way that can produce DMT naturally within you, you can have the euphoria and you can have the experience of going into other realms completely safely, because that's what we do when we're dreaming or in an out-of-body experience. That seems to me the way to do it. Taking a pill to shortcut this is very, very dangerous, it seems to me. And again, that's why I would say at this point in my life, I most definitely would never take DMT, psilocybin, or any hallucinogenic drug, because there's just too much danger that it could either affect me permanently or bring out some sort of psychosis that already exists, or even take away the psychic abilities that I think I have.
Because I think mushrooms is going to go the same way as video games, and we didn't talk about social media and cell phones, all of the stuff just unleashed on the population.
Psilocybin mushrooms.
But now psilocybin, we have a daughter that's 22, and she's like, Dad, they're not drinking as much, but they're using mushrooms because they think they're innocuous. But the visits to emergency rooms for psilocybin psychosis has gone up significantly.
It's a little harder to tell yourself. I mean, I smoked marijuana all through my childhood. I also hate a lot of mushrooms. But it's a little harder to tell yourself that mushrooms are like no big deal, because you can flip right out on mushrooms. Like they eat enough and they're hallucinogenic. They inspire actual hallucinations. Right. So how do you, and maybe you're totally for that, or maybe you're not, but you can't say it's like drinking a cup of coffee. That's a profound thing. You see things that aren't there. That's by definition a big deal, no?
It's absolutely a big deal. And they're studying it for PTSD, and they're studying it for depression. And I'm for that. What I'm not for is it's good medicine. We should all do it.
Right.
That I think it
well, it's kind of like weed and glaucoma. Okay, if it reduces your glaucoma symptoms, I mean, how could you be against that? But there's a huge distance between that conclusion and, hey, it's totally safe, everyone should use it.
Right.
Like you'd take chemo if you had cancer, right? But you're
absolutely
not,
would.
You wouldn't recommend your 8-year-old had chemo.
Would hurt my brain.
Right.
Right? But I have to have chemo or I'll die.
I get it.
And so I need to rehabilitate my brain. And it's probably, from the almost 300,000 scans I've done, the biggest lesson is I'm not stuck with the brain I have, that I can make it better and I can prove it. Now I can also make it worse, and I can prove that too, right? Every day I am making my brain better, or I'm making it worse based on the choices that I make. And that's so exciting. Everybody gets really excited about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is you can remodel your brain. But neuroplasticity goes both ways. Whatever you repeat, you model in your brain. Whatever you repeat becomes tracks that force you into that road, if you will. And so when I go to a restaurant, and the first thing they ask you is, do you want a glass of alcohol? When you go no, over and over and over again, well, no becomes strong in your brain, and so the temptation's low. If you say yes over and over and over again, that then becomes an automatic response. And so we're wiring our brains for health or illness by the choices we make.
Back to psilocybin really quick. What do we know about the risks of using it?
That it can unbalance you.
That is true. I can verify that. Very deeply, completely unbalance you.
Yes. That you want to use it again, although alcohol, if you use alcohol, there's a 15% chance you'll get hooked on it.
Really?
15%. If you use marijuana and you're young, there's a 17% chance. If you're older, it's only 9, according to the latest research. So alcohol and marijuana in the young have an addiction potential for sure. If you're older, alcohol is worse than marijuana. Psilocybin, that's one of the risks, although less so, it seems, than either alcohol or marijuana.
Well, you can't function when you're tripping. So it's not like you could, eat 4 grams of mushrooms or whatever and go to work. You can't.
Well, and the doses in the studies, this is very important. It's 25 milligrams in the studies on depression. And many people I know who microdose are doing 300 milligrams or 400 milligrams. And so it is the Wild West. I am a fan of lion's mane mushrooms. They have cognitive benefits and do not make you see things.
I really don't want to be judgmental about this at all. I'm trying not to be judgmental about it. But the warnings have come through to me loud and clear, and all the research that I've now done, and I think I've now concluded with this podcast, showed to me that it's too dangerous. It's far too real. It's far too dangerous. And our brain is not designed to be taking massive amounts of DMT or LSD or psilocybin. Most definitely, the little that we produce is probably okay. Some people can get away with taking psilocybin or DMT maybe once or twice, and it may not cause them any harm. But is it still worth taking that risk that it could cause you to have psychosis? It could allow non-conscious entities to enter your mind and take over your soul. I don't think so. Thanks very much for listening.